Okay, welcome everybody. I hope you can all hear me. Can somebody give me a thumbs up? Alan, okay, great. Okay, we're going to begin a journey not on Hanukkah, which is still continuing. Tonight we light 7 lights of Hanukkah. Please don't forget to do so at home, even if you've seen it at shul. It's important that every single one of us is involved with the lighting of the Hanukkah lights every single night of Hanukkah. So we're going to go actually through the portion of Mikeitz, and there's some very beautiful storyline and ideas that we can take from it. And this will be available on YouTube as it was last week as well. I want to welcome Neil Janko, who's all the way from Oz. Nice to have you with us. And Andrew, all the way from the coast. And Moshe Solomon, I don't know if you're in South Africa, are you? Wherever you are, nice to have you. And everyone, Helene and Beulah, and Howard, and Sam, and Evelyn. Thank you for joining. Thank you, the Sassoons. So let's first go through a summary of the portion, which we do every week. As I said, there's a lot of storyline that we can derive messages from. So what we're talking about is at the point where Paroh is having a dream. We're going to contrast the dreams of Paroh with the dreams of Yosef that happened last week, which we didn't deal with because we spoke about Hanukkah. But Paroh has 2 dreams. First, there were 7 fat cows that came out of the Nile, and then they were consumed by 7 thin cows. The second dream, there were 7 healthy ears of grain, and then they were eaten and consumed by 7 thin and parched ears of grain. And all of the wise men could not give an interpretation of this dream. And Paroh's butler, we remember from last week, he was one of 2 officials of the king who were put into jail, the baker and the butler. They had their dreams, which Joseph had previously interpreted. And as Joseph had foretold, the baker would be put to death, the butler would be returned to his position to be the butler of Paroh. And he now remembers that he had somebody who had interpreted his dream. So he goes back to the Paroh and he says, there is a man, and I know who can do this for you, and his name is Joseph. Paroh orders Joseph's release, because remember, he's languishing in jail on trumped-up charges. He was completely innocent. The wife of Potiphar, who he was working for, had tried to seduce him, and he had restrained and held back, and she then framed him for attempting to rape her and was put into jail. Now Paroh orders Joseph's release. He comes before the king, and Joseph told Paroh that there were 2 dreams, and both dreams contained a singular message. And what is the message? That there's going to be 7, like there were 7 cows, 7 ears of grain. There will be 7 years of plenty in Egypt. And then they would be followed by 7 years of severe famine. And now he goes out of the role of interpreter of the dream, and he starts to advise Paroh how he's able to resolve the problem. And he says, you take the excess grain of the years of plenty and you store. You store and you hoard the grain that is available in the years of plenty. And when the years of plenty are complete, and we're now going into the 7 years of famine, it will be perfectly good for Egypt, because you're going to have reserves that are going to be able to take you through all the years of famine. Paroh was exceptionally impressed with Joseph's wisdom, and he now appoints Joseph. Remember, he came out of jail 5 minutes ago, and now he appoints him as the viceroy of Egypt, in charge of food collections and operations, and in fact, only second to Paroh. He makes him the second most important people in the empire, in this kingdom of Egypt. So Joseph goes through this very quick movement from being in jail to being the second in command. He's at this point 30 years old, and he's now basically in control of the whole of the Egyptian empire. The 7 years of plenty arrive exactly as he'd foretold, and now the 7 years of, while the years of plenty were happening, so Joseph skillfully oversaw the collection of the surplus grain. Meantime, he marries Osnat, who's the daughter of Potiphar, and she bore him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. So Joseph has 2 sons born in Egypt. And remember, these are the 2 sons that we refer to whenever we give a bracha on Friday night to our children, to the boys. We say, Yisimchem Elokim ke'Ephraim v'chim Manasseh. And there are many commentaries why we specifically bless our children to be like Ephraim and Manasseh and not like any of the other tribes. In fact, to be like the grandchildren of Jacob rather than a child of Jacob. And one of the explanations is that they were brought up in a foreign territory, in difficult places, in Egypt. And nevertheless, they remained righteous. We bless our children that notwithstanding the circumstances that surround them, they should be as righteous as Ephraim and Manasseh. Then a grave famine starts to affect Egypt, and not only Egypt, but the entire Mediterranean region. But Joseph has sufficient store for food because he personally sold to all that were needed. He was now in a position of being able to get money for all of the grain that he had. As we said, the famine extended way beyond Egypt, even to the land of Canaan. And now we have Joseph's father, Jacob, who realizes that he's got to contend with this terrible famine, and therefore he dispatches his children and he says, I want you to go and get food because we won't manage without food in Egypt. So take money and go buy food. But all of you can go except for Binyamin. Why was he so concerned about Binyamin? Because Binyamin was the only other son from the mother Rachel. Joseph, according to Jacob, was now lost to him. He had seen that his coat that he had given him had been covered in blood, as the brothers had given the information to their father, presenting the situation that Joseph had in fact been killed. So he'd lost the son. He only had one son left from Rachel, and he says, no, you can't take Rachel. The brothers arrived, they stood before Joseph, but they didn't recognize him. Well, they had sold him as a child to the caravan that took him all the way down to Egypt. They thought that he was a slave somewhere, so they didn't even think that this all-important person in Egypt would be Joseph, so they didn't recognize him. And Joseph doesn't reveal his identity. Instead, he accuses them of espionage. He says, you are spies, and you've come to spy out the land of Egypt, and he incarcerates them for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph releases all of them, but he keeps a mashkoin, he keeps collateral, and he says, I will keep Shimon behind, and what you have to do now is you have to go and get Binyamin. Go back to your father. You heard the whole story that the father sent them down, and they mentioned that there was a brother that could not possibly part from the father, Benjamin, and Yosef, Joseph, says, I want to see Benjamin. You go back and get Benjamin. I'm keeping your brother Shimon over here, and that way you'll establish your innocence. Oh, the brothers now recognize that this is not simple unfolding events. They came to buy grain, and suddenly they spies, and now they have to go and get Binyamin, and they realize that this is a punishment for the sale of Joseph, and they begin to do teshuvah to express regret for what they had done to their brother. Now, Joseph's servants plant the monies that the brothers had paid for their food into their sacks of grain. And the brothers arrived back in Canaan, and then they discovered that they've got all the money. They came back with the grain, and with the money they paid for the grain was back in the bags because Joseph had planted it into their sacks. And they tell everything that happened to Jacob. Jacob was terribly upset. And initially he said, there's no way I'm parting with Binyamin, with Benjamin. This is the only remaining son of Rachel. The answer is no. But then, Jacob sees that there is grain in Egypt, and there's unfortunately no food in the land of Canaan. And Yehuda, he personally guarantees that he will bring Binyamin safely back from Egypt to the father. And Jacob is forced to agree to send even Benjamin. Now the brothers arrive. Now they're going to prove that they're innocent, that they're not spies. They're going to follow exactly the instructions of this man in Egypt, the viceroy, and they bring Binyamin. And Joseph instructs the palace to supervise, to invite the brothers to join him for an afternoon meal. The brothers were reunited with Shimon, who had been kept behind in Egypt as collateral in the jail in Egypt. And the brothers presented gifts to Joseph. He conceals his deep emotion when he sees his brother Binyamin. Binyamin doesn't know that this is Joseph. Joseph knows that this is Binyamin, but he holds back. He doesn't allow his emotions to be seen at all. At the meal, Joseph presents them all with gifts, and then what he does is he gives Benjamin greater gifts than all the others. He also seats them at the table in the exact order that they were born. So how would he know that? And he says, no, he's got a special goblet. And when he looks at the goblet, he knows exactly all the things that are in people's hearts. He knows the background of everybody. And he seated them at the table in exactly the right order of their birth. Now, when the brothers are finally departing, everything's over, resolved. We're no longer spies. We've proved our innocence, and everything is fine. Joseph has this royal goblet, this miraculous, supernatural goblet with which he used to seat all the brothers in order around the table. Now he doesn't plant the money, he plants the goblet. And whose sack? In Benjamin's sack. The brothers don't know about this. The brothers on their way home, very excited and happy that the whole ordeal is over, and they don't even begin to know what's about to happen. The servants of Joseph come running after them, and they begin to search the bags. They start with the oldest, so it doesn't look like they are aware where the goblet is. They planted it in Benjamin, who was the youngest. They start searching the oldest son, and the next son, and the next son, the next son. The innocent is innocent, until they come to the bag of Binyamin. And lo and behold, the goblet of the viceroy of Egypt is in Benjamin's bag. So now, they brought back to Joseph, and he says to them, this is a thief, you've stolen my goblet, you saw that I had a special goblet, and now I want Benjamin to remain behind as a slave. And next week is going to begin with Judah's response that under no circumstances he stood surety to his father that he's going to bring Benjamin back safely, but we'll leave that for next week. So this is a very, very full storyline. Look how many things are happening, and let's now go into some of the details that we're learning about to see what messages we can take from them. First thing I want to do is parallel the dreams. We had dreams of Paroh, and last week we had dreams of Joseph. So let's talk about the fact that if we have a parallel in two portions, one after the other, both of them talking about dreams. Each portion has two dreams of Joseph and two dreams of Paroh. So there's many similarities. Both of them foretold future events. Similarities again. But now let's look at the differences. The first difference that is evident in the dreams of Joseph as opposed to the dreams of Paroh is that in Joseph's dreams, the first dream was about sheaves in the field. And the second dream was about stars in the heaven. What that implies is that the dream of a Jew has to begin where we are and with the immediate environment that we find ourselves in, but the dream develops, it grows, it reaches for things higher. It's not content to remain tomorrow with yesterday's dream. The dream evolves into dreams of heavenly luminaries, the stars and the sun and the moon. So it is a growth in the process of his dreams, as opposed to Paroh. His first dream begins with the animal world, cows, fat cows, thin cows, the thin cows swallow up the fat cows, and then the next dream goes to sheaves of grain. So his dream begins to recede. It begins to go to a lower form, from the animal world to the plant world. It is a dream that is going backwards, not forwards. The second all-important detail in the dreams of Joseph is V'hinei anachnu ma'almim alumim, we were binding sheaves. There was action. The dream of Joseph began with him talking about his work. We are working in the field. He was doing something in his dream. What was Paroh doing? He was only sloughing, he was only sleeping, and his cow standing. But he himself was distant and apart from the actualities of his dream. He wasn't an involved ingredient. And these two details are very, very important to understand the importance of a dream, if we are to understand it outside of just having a thought process that happens while we're sleeping, so we dream. But if we start talking about the actual dreams of a Jew. So when we talk about a dream, we have a dream of Joseph versus the dreams of Paroh. There's a famous story of Abba Eban, who was once in the United Nations, and he was talking about Israel and how much Israel had achieved and how much Israel can give to the world. And one of the other people standing next to him turns to Abba Eban and he says to him, Mr. Eban, you are dreaming. And he answered famously, I might be dreaming, but I'm not asleep. This is a Jewish dream. Jewish dreams get actualized. We dream and then we fight to achieve the dream. And both of these indifferences between the dreams of Paroh and the dreams of Joseph, that the dreams of Joseph ascended. They began with something that was down in the field and then developed into the luminaries. And then the second difference was that Joseph was involved in action. We were binding sheaves in the field. And a Jewish dream has to be realized by us getting involved in what it is we dream for. Going a little bit further, in the whole debate this really would have been dealt with last week, why were the brothers so jealous of Joseph? They were presenting obvious reasons. The father had given him a special colored coat, striped coat, and it was very valuable and showed favoritism to the brother, to his son Joseph, and the other brothers were jealous of it. But they really believed that Joseph had the wrong approach. They were all shepherds, and they were involved in making sure that everything was involved spiritually in their own space. Now Joseph comes along and he says, I have a dream of being a financier, of somebody who's going to create wealth. I have a dream that I'm going to be involved in the field and I'm actually going to achieve an abundance of grain, which actually materializes. So they said, 1 second, that's not the role of a Jew. A Jew is not getting involved in helping the world in its financial crises. We've got to be isolationists. We've got to be involved in spiritual things. The second dream of Joseph, he dreams about stars in the heaven, representing the spiritual dilemma. And he says, our spiritual role is to impact on the world. We have to have an impact on the world physically, and we have to have impact on the world spiritually. We have to help the world physically. We've got to get involved with the problems of the world physically. And we have to get involved, bringing spiritual strength and growth to the world, both of them. And the Jewish dilemma throughout the ages has always been, which one of these roles is it? The brothers say that this is a madman. This is completely outside of our family. This doesn't belong in our family. We're a close unit. We belong in a unit. We're an entity as a family. And what's he talking about dealing with world crises? And if we are, surely it's got to be spiritual. And if we look at the history of the world, often Jews are getting involved in the political and the physical situations of the world to the neglect of our spiritual purpose and role. And often Jews, on the other hand, are completely involved in their spiritual pursuits, the study of Torah and the fulfillment of mitzvahs, and cut themselves off from the rest of the world. Joseph represented the personality that was able to straddle two worlds, the worlds of sheaves in the field and the world of stars in the sky, the physical world and the spiritual world. And in each of them to impact on it. And look what happens to Joseph ultimately. He goes on to become the provider for the entire region, Egypt and the entire Mediterranean region. And he also lands up becoming a spiritual force of Torah and values that he's able to share with his environment. So the brothers were jealous maybe for the physical things, but they also believed that their brother had lost the plot. But Joseph had a dream. And the dream was to impact the world physically and spiritually. And Paroh's dreams, as we said, was descending and non-action, a totally different dream. Now, when he responds to Paroh, and Paroh says, wow, you're brilliant, you're amazing, you have such an ability, look what you're doing. You're interpreting my dreams, you're giving me advice, you are the man, you are the person. And how does Joseph respond? Hashem Yanen, God will respond for Pharaoh's peace. So he completely attaches his success and his ability to the fact that there is a God in the world. This was probably risky too, because Paroh wasn't so interested in God. He thought he himself was God. You know, like the guy who went to a lunatic asylum, and there was a guy over there, and he says, I am Napoleon. So the visitor says, "You Napoleon? What do you mean? This is beyond the era of Napoleon. How could you say you're Napoleon? Who told you you're Napoleon?" So he said, "God told me I'm Napoleon." The guy next to him says, "Oh no, I didn't." You know, if we're talking about Mishugoyim, we're not actually sure. Paroh thought he himself was God. Now we have Joseph attributing all of his success to God. It was a risky move, but something that we all have to learn from. We all have been blessed with talents, whether it be in the financial world or in the musical world or in the spiritual world. And we all go on to achieve things, and we can sometimes feel very good about what we've achieved and what we've accomplished. And to remain humble and always say, Hashem Yanenu, it is God that is going to answer. Everything is coming from a force bigger than me. I'm just the medium. I'm the instrument that is able to realize the purpose of Hashem. But I don't take credit for being the entire source of success. Let's just think about the life of Joseph. The life of Joseph was filled with so many vicissitudes, with so many movements. He starts out young, he loses his mother. He's orphaned from his mother very young. You would hope that he'd be supported by his family. He has brothers who despise him and who actually want to kill him. The good news for him was that the brothers sold him as a slave instead of killing him. Any psychologist would evaluate and say the chances of the success of this young man who's orphaned at a young age and then rejected by his family and sold by his family, what are the chances? He comes down to Egypt and he starts working and he starts doing whatever he can. And his master says, wow, this is a very talented young man. And he gives him the position of authority over his entire house. So he's emerged from being in such a desperate situation. Immediately now goes into a situation where there's the wife of his master who tries to seduce him again and again. He withstands all of the pressures, and we want to know how. But he stands the pressures, and she holds onto his jacket, frames him, is then thrown into jail for years. And now Joseph is in jail, and then he meets up with the two officers of Paroh, who are also cast into jail. And the Torah tells us how he communicates with them. He says, why are your faces downcrested today? He asks them. Well, they had a very good reason. They could explain. We were recently major servants, head of departments of the king. We were political forces of the king in charge of major the parts of the palace, the butler and the baker. Great charge and great importance. And now we're in jail. So what should we be? We should be depressed. He goes over to Joseph, says to him, why are you downcrested? Why are you feeling lowly today? And then they explain that they had these dreams, they interpreted these dreams. And he says, please don't forget me. Mr. Butler, you're going back to the palace. Don't forget me. Remember, I'm the Jew that made your life possible again. I told you that there was going to be a future. Remember, when you get to Paroh, remember me. The next thing happens. He forgets Joseph. So Joseph's hopes had been up. He's now sending the guy back to the palace, and he's going to speak on his behalf. He forgets about it. And now for years, for 2 years, he remains in jail, even after he had thought that he'd found a way out. And now suddenly he's rocket propelled up to the top of this powerful position in Egypt. And through all of this, Joseph remains Joseph. Where does a person have the power to deal both with the failures, with the pain, with the emotional upheaval that was taking place in his world? As I said, any psychiatrist would use this as a classic case of somebody whose life is going nowhere. And yet Joseph withstands all of the emotional pain, the terrible movement from one extreme to another extreme, to the loss of family, loss of his mother. And then in a moment when the master's wife is trying to seduce him, and now he's being seduced as a man, he's also being seduced with the possibilities of having even more power if he's able to manipulate the wife of his master. But we are told last week. Tsar diyuknoi shel aviv. He visualized the face of his father, and the father believed in him, and the father had raised him, and the father had loved him. And when he connected himself to that image of his father, that is when he said, Vayema'in, he said, no, 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 I will not give up my religious conviction and my moral standards. And he stands true to who Joseph really is. So Joseph has a connection. He has a connection to his father. He has a connection to the values of his father. And notwithstanding all the other pressures of the brothers and what they've done to him, he is able to remain Joseph throughout all of this. He doesn't change and lose one iota of hope and of commitment to the future when he is down and out. And he doesn't lose his connection to his father and to the God of his father when he is now the most powerful man, second to Paroh. He remains Joseph. In fact, when he's described by the butler to the king, how does he describe him? V'sham itanu, and there with us, nar ivri. There was a Jewish man. Somehow he did not find it important to be able to buy and curry favor by disguising his identity as a Jew. That was the definition of who he was. And that emerged when Paroh says, wow, you are magnificent. You are the most, you are king. You are, wow, you. And Yosef says, not me. It's not about me. It's about God. And that is Joseph withstanding all the pressures of life and remaining Joseph throughout everything that he had been through. That's where he got his core values. And it gave him strength to endure the spiritual challenges and the physical challenges of his life. I want to say one more point before getting to the main point that I wanted to share with you. So very quickly, Jacob saw, Yosef ki yesh shever b'Mitzrayim. He saw that there was grain in Egypt. What is the word shever? The word bar means grain. So the word shever means grain. But we know that the Hebrew language is so powerful, and the word shever actually comes from a different Hebrew word. What does lishbor mean in Hebrew? Shavur means broken. So Jacob saw that there was shever in Egypt. There was sustenance, there was food, there was the ability to find grain. But at the same time, Yarya and Jacob saw ki yesh shever b'Mitzrayim, that Egypt has got the possibilities of brokenness. It has the possibility of destroying and undermining. And therefore, he had such a dilemma in allowing them to go to Egypt. How would they now engage with this period that would eventually be, as this verse continues, that says, that we learn from this word, from the words in this verse, that there was redu, that there was 210 years that they were to be in slavery, from the same verse. So Egypt was going to be a source of great blessing, and Egypt was going to be a source of great dilemma and eventually physical slavery. A lot happens in this world. Sometimes we think that the things that are going to bring us the greatest assets are sometimes the things that can bring about the greatest destruction in our life. But ultimately, Yaakov gives his children, as we'll learn next week, the ability to set up a family which becomes a nation, which eventually outlives the slavery of Egypt and eventually outlives the empire of Egypt, and continues to be a nation standing at Sinai and finding a mission to make a difference in this world forever. But we always have to remember, sometimes we think the things that are the bar, the sustenance, the grain, the assets, the increasing of value is sometimes a hidden passage to great destruction. You know, we often think of our credit cards as being a great convenience in our lives. What an asset, you just charge it to the card. But at the end of the month, it could be a great disappointment and painful responsibility. So life presents shever and shever, and it depends how we utilize the opportunities of shever, whether we are able to really get out the shever, either meaning grain or meaning pain. Whether it's going to be pain or grain or gain, depends on us. And now I want to get to the main point that I wanted to share with you, and that is Joseph sees his brothers. He recognizes them. but he acts as a stranger to them. And he spoke harshly to them. And the obvious question we have to ask, this has got to be the core question of this Shabbos, is why when Joseph sees his brothers, why does he not reveal himself? And if you think that it was about realizing his dreams, where he said that there were 11 stars bowing down, and there was 11 sheaves bowing down, and they represented his brothers who would bow down to him, which is for the reason that they sent him away as a slave. So maybe he had to realize that dream and make them bow down to him. God forbid to say that that was the total interest of Joseph. There is no need. If God is going to intend that the brothers are going to bow down to him, he had no responsibility to and make sure that it happened. Furthermore, it wasn't just about his brothers. It was about his father. His father was going through such pain and anguish. How could he delay even for a minute the anguish of his father and not reveal that he was alive? His father thought that he was dead. Surely that would be the first intention, that he would resolve the problem of his father's pain. Send a message back to his father. He had the power to do it. He could have done it before the brothers even arrived. Certainly now when he sees them. So if he inflicts pain on his brothers, he inflicts pain on his father, Jacob. What was Joseph's reason and goal? I want to share something which to me is so fundamental and so beautiful in understanding the big vision of Joseph. And if we had enough time, we'd be able to go through every detail, why he kept back Shimon, why specifically Shimon and not a brother. But I don't know if there's enough time for that. Let's see. But the overall question, why does he not reveal himself? And based on some of the thoughts expressed by Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who was a great leader of the German community last century and did so much to preserve orthodoxy in an environment that was rearing and veering to reform, Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, based on a few insights that he says, I want to develop an approach to understanding Joseph. Joseph had this dilemma that if he would reveal himself to his brothers and to his father, what would happen? The father would gain a son whom he thought he'd lost. That would be wonderful. But what would happen simultaneously? In that same moment, Jacob would lose the 10 sons who he thought he had. Because when the story is going to emerge, and there's going to be the details that they attempted to kill him, and they didn't kill him, they sold him as a slave, and they came to the father with blood on a coat, which they had misrepresented the facts to the father. They lied to their father. They caused the father so much anguish and so much pain for decades and decades. So looking to resolve his life, connect himself to his father, father connected to him, that was a detail, an important, a vital detail, something that was playing so heavily on his heart that he had the great ability to look at the big picture. And the big picture meant that while he would be resolving his life, 10 brothers would land up ruining their relationship with their father. And the father, who was so pleased to see the one son whom he thought he lost, would simultaneously lose the 10 sons whom he thought he had. And for that reason, Joseph has to concoct a plan that is genius, that is brilliant, that is all-inclusive of every element that has to be cleaned up. And the key to all of that was Binyamin. He had to bring Benjamin down to Egypt. Why was Binyamin so important? Because he needed to set up a situation which would parallel the situation that the brothers were in when they sold Joseph to slavery. And if they would react differently, and if they would respond as the brothers should have responded and lived their lives in their relationship with Joseph, if they now behave differently to Benjamin, then he can show that they have completely resolved and repented and fixed the mistakes of the past. The key to that is Benjamin. And remember, when Binyamin comes down, what does he do to Binyamin? He gives them all gifts, but he gives Binyamin much, much more than any of the others. Does this remind us of anything? The whole thing started with Jacob giving more to Joseph than to the other brothers. That's what triggered the jealousy in the first place. So he's going exactly down the same route. He's putting the brothers in exactly the same position. There's going to be a brother from the preferred wife, from Rachel, from the wife that Jacob really loved, which was something that could be resented by the brothers all their lives. And now they bring him down, and suddenly he's showering the son, Benjamin, his brother Benjamin, with all of these gifts, much more than the brothers. The brothers are thinking about the events of the past. They know that this has happened before. And then he takes it further. Not only does he treat Benjamin with greater kindness than them, reason for them to be jealous, he then shows that Benjamin is a thief. All of them are surprised to see that Binyamin had in his satchel the goblet of the king. Was he mad? What was he thinking? This is now the ruin of the family. Our whole family is going to get taken down because of the interests of one child, the one that's favored, the one that comes from the preferred wife. So he puts the brothers into the exact same position that they were in when Joseph was a 17, 18-year-old child. But there's a great vast difference. The brothers on this occasion are not selling out their brother Benjamin. They're not saying he deserves it. Look what he's done. He's a thief. Keep him in Egypt. We'll go free. As Joseph offered. He says, you guys can go free, everyone. I just want the thief. I want the cause of all the problems. Benjamin, he's got to stay behind in Egypt. And we'll see next week that Judah stands up with all his power and all his strength. And he says, Vayigash elav Yehuda, nothing doing. The son is bound up inextricably with his father. We cannot go back without him. We're ready to pray and we're ready to do everything we can. We're ready to fight. We're ready to give our lives, but we're not giving up on Benjamin. And it's only next week, after that whole speech of Judah on behalf of the brothers, that Joseph can no longer contain himself. And he bursts into tears. He says, I am Joseph. I'm your brother. Now, emergency, let's go and tell our father. Because now when they tell the father, not only will the father regain the son, Joseph, whom he thought he had lost, but all of the terrible events that surrounded the departure of Joseph will now be overshadowed by the way the brothers stand up with strength and commitment and determination not to allow Benjamin to be harmed. And the father will now see that the brothers who had previously sold out a brother now stood by the brother when they had the exact same reasons and more to despise Benjamin for all of the extra gifts that he received and for being the cause of their problems by stealing the goblet of the viceroy. Joseph needs to look at the big picture. It's not only about me. It's not only about resolving my relationship. It's not that I'm missing my father. I've got to restore this family. I've got to bring the family back to where it was before the tragedy started. And therefore he concocts this whole plan involving the brothers, accusing them of being spies, espionage, forcing their hands and forcing the hand of the father to rip away Benjamin from the father's side, which caused him additional pain temporarily. But at the end of all of this, the whole family is smelling like roses. It takes a great person to be able to look at a problem and a difficulty and to see how it needs to resolve not only things for me in my little detail, but how do I resolve it for everybody? How do I restore my family to where it was before everything began? It is such a beautiful insight into something so difficult to understand about Joseph, not revealing himself, causing so much pain to the brothers. It was a necessary process. The Rambam says, how do you know that a person has done teshuvah? Really? It's when a person stands in exact same circumstances that they were when they failed the first time, and they withstand the pressures, and they are able to stand by and make the right decision where they had previously failed. That proves teshuvah. We're not talking about giving lip service. We're not just talking about saying, I really want to repent. I had a grandson, my grandchild, and my granddaughter today were at the house, and they were arguing about something, got into a fight over the scooter, and the Zayda comes along. He doesn't know from the modern day techniques where everyone like negotiates everything. And I said, yeah, you're fighting about the scooter. Nobody has the scooter. Put it down on the side. Nobody has it. That's like the old discipline. Nowadays, there's like much more modern ways of negotiating and talking to kids. But the point is that a situation where you're resolving something for one and not resolving something for everybody, where you're seeing the problem and you're able to put the person in exactly the same situation where they failed. The point that I was saying was my grandson turned back and said to me, okay, Anschuldig Zayde, I won't do it again. I won't do it again. And I was a bit harsh, and I said, I don't know if you're not going to do it again. Meantime, it happened. Put it aside. Next time you come, you play with the scooter. It's very easy to say I'm sorry. But to really say I'm sorry means that you are in exactly the same circumstance, the same test, the same trial, the same difficulties, the same emotional pain and drain that you were in the first time round. And you stand strong and you make the right decision. That proves teshuvah. And that's what Joseph wanted to bring out of his brothers, and sets them up in every possible way to be able to reach that point of resolution. And this is a beautiful point in all of our lives. At work sometimes there's a detail and there's a problem. And the first way we can reach for is to say, how do I sort out myself? It's about me. It's about my life and my detail. The company can fall apart. I don't know. It's all about me. And then there's an ability to look at the problem and to say, how can we find a solution that's going to make it good for everybody? In a country, it can't be about a political party alone. It cannot be about personal gain of politicians who have the power to do what they want to do. There's got to be a desire to find solutions that are going to be able to empower everybody, to make everybody's life enriched. That's the message I want to leave you with from this week, that we are able to look at the problems of our lives and not only see them small-mindedly, tunnel vision, with a specific focus on a detail, but to stand on top of the mountain and to look and to see the entirety of the issue, how it affects everybody around one, and how one can find a solution that is going to resolve the problem, not just for me, but for everyone around me as well. I thank you. Thank you for joining. We've hit the hour, 8 o'clock. Optikop. Thank you for joining wherever you are on your vacations. Please, God, travel safely, stay safe, and in Yetz Hashem, we should get together to study and to learn wherever we are in the world over the next Wednesdays. We'll try and keep it up as much as we can. If we can't, I saw that last week we had 61 people watch the shiur on YouTube. That's a record. So somehow the message is getting out, and I'm happy that we're able to share these words of Torah with as many people as we can. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Rolf.
Thank you, Neil. Regards there. Thank you, Beulah, for joining. Thank you. Nice to see you.
So much. You too.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you, Evie. God bless. Thank you, Evine. God bless.